Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Pocket Passer on I-FormNation. I'm your host, Randy White, and today I've got a great group of topics to cover in the NFL today. So before we dive in, I'm going to cover all of the topics I'm going to be covering today in the podcast very quickly. We're going to start talking about the Baker Mayfield trade to the Panthers. Then we're going to jump to the Panthers quarterback room and discuss in depth what it's going to look like with Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, and Matt Corral all competing for a starting job there. Then we're going to jump to the Browns quarterback room, Deshaun Watson, Jacoby Brissett, which specifically is going to be covering Deshaun Watson and his whole chaotic situation that he has unfolded for himself, both in Houston and now still in Cleveland. And then we're going to jump to my biggest two dark horse teams that I think are going to potentially make some noise in this year's regular season and maybe, just maybe, even squeeze into a 7th seed playoff spot. And then finally, I'm going to talk about why the Green Bay Packers won't miss Davante Adams as nearly as much as you think they will. And piggybacking off of the Davante Adams, why it is that Derek Carr is poised to have his biggest season yet. So now, to officially start the show, as many of you have heard, Baker Mayfield was traded to the Carolina Panthers for a 2024 conditional 5th-round pick, and in addition, Baker Mayfield has taken a $3.5 million pay cut. Now, what this means is that he's now going to be on the Carolina Panthers roster, presumably to start the season at quarterback, and they will be playing in Charlotte, North Carolina, hosting the Cleveland Browns in Week 1, which will undoubtedly be a very exciting event if Baker Mayfield does in fact win the starting job for the Panthers. He has to compete against Sam Darnold and Matt Corral. And one thing that I think is very interesting about this whole situation is now Carolina has 2 of the top 3 picks in the 2018 draft, with of course Baker Mayfield being selected 1st overall to the Cleveland Browns and Sam Darnold 3rd overall to the New York Jets. And what's also interesting about this whole situation is they're the top 2 quarterbacks in the league in interceptions thrown since 2018 when they came in the league. Baker Mayfield is 1st with 56 interceptions, and Sam Darnold is 2nd with 52 interceptions. So no doubt a lot of turnovers that have occurred between these 2 guys. And from that standpoint, it looks very, very gloomy if you're a Carolina Panther fan at the quarterback situation. But one thing that I think everyone has to consider about Baker Mayfield's statistics is what he's had to go through. I'm going to put up his stats over his career up on the screen. You'll be able to see it. I'm looking at it right now on my computer. He has 14,125 career yards, which is basically 3,500 per season. His best season, he had 3,800 yards. That was his 2nd year in the league. He has 92 touchdowns. That's 23 per season. His best season was 27, which was his rookie year. Sorry, the 3,800. No, that was his 2nd year. He's 56 interceptions, which is a 14 per season average. So, again, not fantastic. All these stats, very average. The yards maybe slightly above average. The yards are a little above average, but touchdown, interception, very average numbers. 8 interceptions was his best, however. That was his 3rd year in the league, when he threw for 26 touchdowns, which was his 2nd most, and 8 interceptions and about 3,600 yards. His completion percentage over his career is 61.6%. His best was 63.8%, which I believe was his 3rd year, which again, also the 1st year with Kevin Stefanski. His passer rating over his career, 87.8. His best was 95.9, which is a very productive passer rating. As I said, he had a very good year, his 3rd year in the league, when he had finally stability with Kevin Stefanski, an effective offensive scheme that was truly consistent from week to week. He had the best 4-game span of his career in that season, where he threw 10 touchdowns and only 1 pick, playing against the Jaguars, the Giants, the Ravens, and one other team that was good. The Jaguars and Giants, undoubtedly terrible teams. But the Ravens, a competitive team, no doubt. And that was his best stretch that he's had, which was very, very productive. But the biggest thing that I think a lot of people forget about, and they want to talk about, he's had this incredible offensive line, which he has. He had Odell, and Odell didn't work. Jarvis Landry, he has a great running back core, obviously. Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt. But the issue here is there's been an extreme lack of stability that is just abnormal at the coaching position. You don't see this very often at all. He said 4 head coaches in the 4 years he's been in the league. He had a Hugh Jackson, and then when Hugh Jackson got fired, they promoted Greg Williams to become the interim head coach, who was the defense coordinator. They then did not keep Greg Williams for his second year. So just in his rookie year, 2 head coaches. Then in his second year, Freddie Kitchens, who a lot of people were optimistic about, but he did not work out either. And that was when Baker Mayfield had his worst season, 22 touchdowns, but 21 interceptions, his worst passer rating, of course. And then they bring in Kevin Stefanski, and he has his best year. He's healthy. And then he has another down year last year where he threw, I believe it was 14 interceptions, so right on that average, and not many touchdowns at all. More touchdowns than picks, but not an exceptional touchdown number. But the issue here is he was injured. He injured his left shoulder, and that can affect the throwing motion for a quarterback, undoubtedly. He had several injuries, though. It wasn't just the shoulder. He injured his foot. I think he injured his ribs. You might have to fact check me on that. But the point is he has went through a ton of adversity, and I think if they can protect him in Carolina with some of the weapons they have, DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, who's a solid receiver, who appeared to not be very happy about the possibility of him being traded. And if Christian McCaffrey can stay healthy, I think the Panthers could potentially have an effective offense over there with Baker Mayfield at the helm. So now, I want to jump to the Browns quarterback room. Deshaun Watson, Jacoby Brissett. Obviously, Jacoby Brissett's going to be playing because I find it hard to believe that after 66 masseuses in a 17-month span and 24 allegations, regardless of him settling 20 of them, that the NFL won't suspend him for, if not the entire year, the vast majority of the year. I just struggle to get it through my head that with the way it looks, the court of public opinion is undoubtedly way against Deshaun Watson. And I think the NFL knows that the backlash they will receive if they allow Deshaun Watson to not be suspended will be tremendous. So it is in the NFL's best interest to make it look like they at least tried to punish him, even if actual legal courts don't punish him, to suspend him for at least some time. I think that is likely what's going to happen. So you're going to see Jacoby Brissett lace up most likely in week 1 versus the Panthers. And I would not be shocked to see Jacoby Brissett start the entire season, and if not Brissett, Josh Dobbs, who's their third string quarterback. So now more specifically the Deshaun Watson situation, like I said, 66 masseuses in a 17-month span is abnormal. No one does that. I mean, I've yet to hear a single person come out and defend Deshaun Watson and be like, oh, well, yeah, I also have just gone through a ton of masseuses. Like, you just don't see that. It's not something that NFL athletes, I mean, you watch anyone who's doing a sports talk show, none of them are like, oh, yeah, that's normal. Which leads me to believe that it's not normal, guys. It's not, and it's very strange that there's even a little bit of defense against Deshaun Watson, because it's a very mucky situation, and I don't see how the NFL can possibly justify not suspending him, even if there is no legal action taken against Deshaun Watson, fully because of the NFL's past history, which suggests that they will come in and play judge, jury, and executioner, regardless of what the law rules. And, they suspended Ezekiel Elliott despite substantial legal evidence against him just a few years ago. So the NFL has clearly made it a standard, a precedent, that they will suspend guys even if legal proof is not brought forward and legal punishment is not initiated. So now, moving on to dark horse teams. There are 2 dark horse teams that I think a lot of people are ignoring, and yes, there's a very good chance they don't make the playoffs, because the reality is they've been bad teams for a number of years, or in some cases, almost their entire history. I'm talking about the Detroit Lions and the Houston Texans. I like both of these situations a lot. So, for the Detroit Lions, let's look at Jared Goff's season stats from last year. I'm going to have them up on the screen. 3,245 passing yards, 19 touchdowns, 8 picks, a 67.2 passer rating. A 67.2 completion percentage, and a 91.5 passer rating. The touchdowns are a little low. I get that. But all in all, these are solid numbers considering that the Lions were not an overall good roster at all last year. And they fought hard in a lot of games. They competed in a lot of games. And they lost narrowly and in many ways in unlucky ways a lot last season. They get a 66-yard field goal kicked on them by Justin Tucker. They get a 50-plus field goal kicked on them by the Vikings the first time when they lost to them in the first game they played them in. And they competed hard and played close against a lot of teams. They tied against the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Detroit Lions are a team that I think just came out on the wrong end of a lot of games last year, and they improved their defense. Amon-Ra St. Brown really showed up in the back 5-ish games of the season last year, really came into his own. I believe he was second in the league in rookie receptions behind Jalen Waddle, which a lot of people would expect Jamar Chase to be 2, if not 1. But Jamar Chase, I believe, is 3rd. Amon-Ra St. Brown had an exceptional last several games of the season. Jared Goff really connected with him. Jared Goff won NFC Offensive Player of the Week in Week 13 in their win versus the Vikings. It was their first win of the season. Then the Lions would go on to beat the Arizona Cardinals, who were, yes, struggling, but still one of the better teams in the league in a lot of people's eyes. So the Lions are a team that they clearly improved in the back half of the year. They improved in the draft. They improved in the offseason. They have the highest paid offense in the league. They have a very good offensive line, talented running backs with DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams, a talented receiving core now with the rookies they added, with Amon-Ra St. Brown, with DJ Chark, and more. So the Lions are a team that I expect to at least be 3rd in the NFC North and potentially, now I don't predict them doing this, but potentially fight for a playoff spot. And that sounds crazy because they haven't really even done that. They barely could do it with Matthew Stafford, and now Matthew Stafford's gone, and obviously they don't have nearly as good of quarterback play right now. But I'm telling you, they're a team that you should watch for to at least compete every single week. And then the other team, Houston Texans, like I said just a couple minutes ago, the Houston Texans are a team that I think have put themselves in a great position to be competitive and be 1 to 2 years away from really making some legitimate noise in the AFC, just like I think the Lions are 1 to 2 years away from making legitimate noise in the NFC. The Houston Texans have a young quarterback that they drafted in the 6th round, Davis Mills. He started in 11 games last year, played in 13, threw for 2,600 yards, 16 touchdowns, 10 picks, about a 67% completion percentage, about an 89 passer rating. So none of these numbers are exceptional, and I get that. But he didn't have a good offensive line. He didn't have exceptional receiving core. Obviously, Brandon Cooks is a very talented receiver who puts up some good, productive numbers the last couple of years. But he didn't have a lot of help, and he still won't have a ton of help this year. But I expect him to progress. I expect him to be a little bit better than he was last year. I was very, very impressed, and this is the reason I like Davis Mills. Putting the stats aside, because 16 touchdowns and 10 picks is nothing incredibly impressive. But he threw 3 touchdown passes against the New England Patriots and really gave the Patriots a run for their money. And 3 touchdown passes from a rookie against a Bill Belichick defense is not something you ever see, ever. It just doesn't happen. And that's why I am really, really hopeful for Davis Mills to take a leap this year and become a productive quarterback for the Houston Texans, and even make the Houston Texans potentially a productive and competitive team this year. I'm not saying they're going to make the playoffs, especially since the AFC is just so good this year. You have 13 of the 16 teams that are legitimate playoff contenders, and that's not including what I'm talking about with the Houston Texans. So I don't see him pushing for a playoff spot, but I do see him competing against good teams, potentially beating a few good teams, and making some noise, getting some people to notice them while still getting a pretty solid draft pick again next year because, like I said, the AFC is too good and they're not going to place tremendously high in it. So now moving on to why I think the Green Bay Packers won't miss Davante Adams nearly as much as you think they will. if you look at Aaron Rodgers' stats with Matt LaFleur and without Davante Adams, so this is since 2019 when Matt LaFleur replaced Mike McCarthy and became the head coach through the 2019 season and then onward. And since then, they've won 13 games every season. And yes, Davante Adams has been there for the vast majority of the ride, and he's been a tremendously important piece of the Green Bay Packers offense, no doubt. I'm not trying to take anything away from Davante Adams. He's no doubt a top 2 receiver in the league. Whether you want to give the best to Cooper Kupp or Davante Adams is up to you, but he's right there with the best of them, undoubtedly. But these are Aaron Rodgers' stats without Davante Adams since LaFleur took over. And you'll see Rodgers is still one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, regardless of Davante Adams' presence on the field. They've played 7 games. They've won all 7 games. Rodgers has thrown for 2,049 yards in those 7 games, which is 292 yards per game. He has 19 touchdowns, which is almost 3 touchdowns per game. He only has 1 interception in that span of time, and at almost 69% completion percentage nearly on 34 attempts per game. So it's not like they were leaning on the run game without Davante Adams. No, they still aired it out. They threw the ball 34 times per game with Rodgers without Davante, and he completed almost 69% of his passes. So if you're a Packer fan or if you're an NFC North fan that hates the Packers, and whether you're worried about the Packers' downfall potentially happening or if you're praying on the Packers' downfall, whatever it may be, it's not happening yet. It's not happening until Aaron Rodgers forgets how to throw a football, because this man is still incredible regardless of Davante Adams' presence on the field. And the Packers' offense is still going to be a force to be reckoned with, regardless of what you think Davante Adams' absence means. And these stats prove it, undoubtedly, because they played some good defenses in this span of time, including 2 years ago, 2020, New Orleans Saints, where they still put up big numbers. They put up, I believe, 37 points on that very good defense. Obviously, the next year they didn't do anything against them. But that's just an example of one of several games where Rodgers showed out. He leads his team to a win against the Arizona Cardinals, regardless of not having Davante Adams, Allen Lazard, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling. His top 3 guys are out. Robert Tonyan tears his ACL in the middle of the game. Robert Tonyan will be healthy for this year. We'll have Allen Lazard back. We have young guys. The Packers are trying, or at least looking to sign another veteran. They brought in Sammy Watkins. The Packers are going to be just fine. And now finally, Derek Carr's biggest year is coming up. Obviously, we know they just acquired Davante Adams. Their offensive line isn't as good as it was a few years ago, but it's still a decent offensive line. They have a powerful running game still. It's not incredible, but Josh Jacobs is a formidable runner. He's a strong runner, and when he stays healthy, I mean, he can get the job done. He's a good player. Now they have a really productive, tough-to-cover slot receiver in Hunter Renfrow that isn't going to have their best corners on him because Davante Adams is on the outside. And you have Darren Waller as a vertical threat up the middle or outside or wherever. He's a tight end that can block. And then you just put him at receiver, and he's just as fast as any of the receivers. So the Raiders really have an exceptional list of options for Derek Carr to throw the football to. And if you look at, I want to bring up Derek Carr's stats from his 2016 season. I'm going to have them up here right in front of me. He had 3,900 yards, which is 262 yards per game, 28 touchdowns, 6 picks, a 64% completion percentage, a 97 passer rating, and he played and started in 15 games. He didn't finish the season, didn't play in the playoffs due to a broken fibula. The Raiders were 12-3 with Derek Carr as the starter that year. And the reason I bring this up is because that was the year he had Amari Cooper, who was his most productive with the Raiders. And he had, near the end of Michael Crabtree's productivity, Michael Crabtree was a very effective receiver for Derek Carr as well. And the main reason that I bring these guys up is, other than last year, you could argue last year he had just as good of a receiving core, but that 2016 season was the best receiving core that Derek Carr has had and the best overall supporting cast, a good defense that Derek Carr has had since I mean, that's the best he's had up until now. Now that he's got Davante Adams, Hunter Renfrow, Darren Waller, an upgraded defense. This is the most competitive Raiders team that Derek Carr has had around him, undoubtedly, since that 2016 season. And we saw what he did. He competed for an MVP award until breaking his fibula. And he had the Raiders in the playoffs. Of course, for them to lose in the playoffs because, again, he was injured. But if Derek Carr can use the talent that they've put around him, he's poised for a big, big year. And I think it's important that you don't sleep on the Raiders. I know a bunch of people jumped on him there, all hyped about him when the Davante Adams trade happened, when they upgraded the defense. But it's important to understand that now that people have kind of forgotten about it, the Raiders are here, and they're a legitimate team in that AFC West division. That's a loaded, loaded division. But they are a legitimate contender and will really compete for a high-seeded playoff spot. And I just think it's really important that you guys watch the Raiders, watch Derek Carr, because Derek Carr is going to have a breakout year, and he's going to compete for an MVP award, no doubt. No doubt. He's a very good quarterback. People are sleeping on him. People were thinking that he's getting overpaid, and he is getting paid a lot of money, but it's going to be worth it this year. I'm confident in that. So, that's my first show. Thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate you for taking the time out of your day to watch this. If you enjoy the content I'm putting out, if you want to see more of this type of setting, make sure to like the video, leave a comment, share to your friends if you think that I had some good talking points to cover today. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at I-FormNation. On YouTube, if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure to follow and subscribe if it's YouTube. Make sure to follow our TikTok at I-FormNation. We'll be trying to get some more videos out there on our TikTok. And all of you have a tremendous day. Thank you so much for watching.